This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Dan Blue III, political analyst and chairman of the Wake County Democratic Party, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, and Becki Gray with the Carolina Journal, also a political analyst. This week we had the great pleasure of appearing before the North Carolina 4-H Congress, where all of us agreed that we were impressed with the young men and women delegates from across our state. Well, there's a lot going on in our legislature, and we want to cover as many topics as possible this week. We begin with the number one issue, the state budget, and we ask our panelists where things stand. With the state budget year ending tomorrow, lawmakers have been scrambling to reach agreement on both taxes and revenues as well as state spending. The Senate and the House both passed a continuing resolution, a bill that would continue current spending for 30 days, a sign they don't think the legislature is going to reach agreement on both the tax and spending packages in time for them to become law tomorrow. Chris, we understand there are big differences between the Senate and the House on the so-called tax reform package and that negotiations are held up until they reach a consensus on taxes. What do you think is the holdup on the tax package?
Well, it did appear from reports that they were getting a little closer as this last week ended. One of the holdups now, I think, is how much the tax cut is going to cost us. You know, Governor McCrory has said for a long time he wants this to be he said revenue neutral, which means it would bring in roughly the same amount of money under the new tax structure as the current tax structure brings in. The Senate plan, the only plan the Senate has actually voted on, would actually cost us $4 billion over 5 years, which is hardly revenue neutral. The House plan, about half of that. I think they're going to probably shrink that number even greater, and there are a lot of other things that are holding them up. But I think the fundamental thing is, and Governor McCrory said this again this past week, he wants to make sure there's enough money to pay for the essential services of the state. I think that neither plan does that, but you asked me what's holding it up, and I think that's what it is.
Becki, we started off with all of these grandiose proclamations about major tax reform in North Carolina. It's beginning to look more and more like, instead of reform, what we're really looking at is tax cuts. Is that correct?
I don't agree with that at all. No, I think we are looking at comprehensive tax reform, although we haven't come to an agreement yet. There are plans out there. And philosophically, all of these things are really on the same page. And it's tax reform that would mean the personal income tax would be flattened to one rate. The corporate tax would either be reduced greatly and perhaps even phased out entirely, and then a broadening of the sales tax base. That, I think, in anybody's book, is tax reform. Now, in addition to that, there are tax cuts. Now, Chris has indicated that he thinks that's a bad thing. I happen to think that tax cuts and a reduction in government spending, returning more of that money to the taxpayers, is a very good thing and a very way to go.
I disagree with the governor on that. I disagree with the governor.
You disagree with the governor?
I agree with the governor.
You side with your governor on this,
right.
Is that right?
He'll be thrilled to know that.
Dan, in like manner, one of the big arguments has been over homeowners' deductions for mortgage interest. Been a lot of angst over that. How do you think that one's going to turn out?
That's going to be an interesting contest. You've got a lot of very powerful lobbies rooting to make sure that tax deduction stays in there. Anytime you tinkle or play around with the tax code, you have to make sure that you're either protecting some of those interests or that you're across the board removing some of those interests. That's the only way to make it work.
And John, I don't know whether there's been any give on that or not, but another part of the discussion on this, sort of linked to it, was the deductions for charitable contributions. What's up with that?
I think you'll end up with something similar to what the House came up with originally, which is something that essentially creates a cap on the amount that people can deduct. And how they end up solving that problem may be different than either of the House or the Senate came up with. For example, they might have different deductions or credits for different levels of income or something like that. But they're going to cap the deductions that people are going to take, and that broadens the income tax base. That's part of the tax reform idea.
All right, so let me just quickly go around the table. What's your prediction as to when we're going to see a resolution on the tax package and on a new budget? Becki, we'll start with you.
Well, they have said that they are working through the tax reform package first to determine what kind of revenue they're going to have and then tackle the budget. I'm guessing probably 2 weeks.
2 weeks. It'll be 2 weeks. Chris?
I think it'll probably be at least the third week of July. And interestingly, just looking up this past week, in 2009, the last time Republicans were in the minority, Phil Berger was very critical of the Democrats for going to July 14th without a budget and saying it's very irresponsible. The Republicans control all three branches of government, and then we don't have a budget.
So you're not talking about adjournment. You're talking about it'll be 3 weeks before we get
a full. I think of a full budget, right?
Dan?
About 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks sounds
John?
right.
I agree with that.
All right, Speaker Tillis said he wanted to adjourn July 1st, and he and a group of his caucus members have pledged not to shave until adjournment. I wrote a little blog site this week telling him to shave and take his time and let's get this thing right. What is the prediction so far as when we will get adjournment, John?
I do not think he will look like Santa Claus, though if he does, it will be about Christmas time.
Dan?
I'm thinking end of July.
That was a good no answer, by the way.
Yeah, I think the earliest it'll be is the last week of July. There's always one or two things we can't forecast that could hold it up in the budget, so it could spill into early August. I think but August 1 maybe.
But I think once they reach agreement on some of these things, everything else is going to fall into place. So I think we're
Still
kind
a lot
of pushing
of big
towards
legislation out there.
But they're being discussed, and from my experience being down there, they can walk and chew gum at the same time.
The danger in all this, of course, and I said this when the Democrats were in power, is that what we're going to start seeing is meetings around people's desks. We had an environmental bill that was it used to be 4 pages long. This past week it was unveiled. It was 43 pages long. The only people who had seen it were the House and Senate members who wrote it, and it passed the committee. So we're getting into the time when it's very alarming, I think, for democracy.
Oh, it's crazy season the last 2 weeks.
It's not in anybody's best interest.
Well, you can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and click on the YouTube button on the right side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so you can view us anytime you like. And while at ncspin.com, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. And now you can follow us on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. You can be part of the statewide conversation at ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, Spin Cycle, and NC Spin Tweets. Come join the conversation. When we come back, unemployment numbers.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
There's a new day dawning for our state. A fresh crop of leaders are bringing conservative reform. Gone are the days of billion-dollar deficits, and the threat of Obamacare minimized. Now they're working to get our economy on track by holding the line on spending, cutting taxes, passing tax reform that's smart and fair. Let's get back in the game, North Carolina. Encourage our new leaders to keep going.
We now return to NC Spin.
Every politician says jobs are the most important issue in our state, but the latest unemployment numbers tell a story of slow to little improvement. May's unemployment rate dropped 0.1% from 8.9 to 8.8%. While it's the lowest it's been since 2008 and it's dropped every month this year, that's not great news for the long-term unemployed residents. Beginning tomorrow, 71,000 people will see unemployment insurance benefits end. Question one to John. When the recession hit North Carolina, we didn't have the reserves to pay the flood of unemployment claims, so we borrowed money from the federal government, racking up about a $2 billion debt. Earlier this year, the legislature leaders chose to help pay back that debt by ceasing unemployment payments 6 months earlier than the federal government allowed. Now, newspapers and TV stories have bemoaned the fact that we're the only state in the nation to have taken this action. What's your take on these stories?
Well, we're not the only state in the nation to have cut unemployment insurance benefits, state benefits. We're the only state that didn't get a waiver from the federal government for the maintenance of effort requirement for federal extended benefits. So other states were able to get something that the Obama administration will not give North Carolina. Remember, the North Carolina action was about state benefits. It was adjusting the benefit levels and the tax rates for state benefits. The reason why the federal extended benefits go away is because of a federal rule that says if you changed your state benefits, then you don't get to keep the federal extensions. But some states got exceptions or waivers from that rule. We didn't. North Carolina lawmakers decided to go ahead and implement in July because they thought if they waited to the end of the year, the federal government would just do it again in 2014 and impose the same requirement.
Chris, these latest unemployment numbers are not really good news. We lost jobs in a number of key segments across the state. What does that tell you about the shape of our economy?
Well, it says that we're still struggling, and I think that's what is so fascinating. I don't think anybody thought, even though it went down, as you mentioned, 0.1%, every economist on the left and the right thought this was a bad news because so many more people were still looking for work in North Carolina, which is why this unemployment thing to me seems so tragic, that we have 71,000 men and women who are looking for jobs, who've been looking for jobs, who are now going to lose their benefits. We're going to lose the money into the economy. I really think at the very least we should put this off 6 months.
The point is that for it or against it, $20 million worth of money that's been going into cities and towns in North Carolina to these unemployed is just going to vanish tomorrow.
That's right. That's $20 million each week that's going into these communities, through people buying groceries, purchasing gas to get to and from. If you don't have new jobs there to receive them, to receive these new people that are going to be back looking for jobs, it's a recipe for disaster.
Becki, is there any possibility the feds might do, as John discussed, and extend these benefits even further? I mean, could we get...
It doesn't look like it here in North Carolina. In March, Speaker Tillis and Senator Berger sent a letter to the United States Department of Labor asking for a waiver, and they were turned down. So it doesn't seem like that is. This is a movement to get this debt under control, to get things back on track, to get the economy back moving, to get people back to work.
Well, the census data shows our state is growing by about 100,000 people per year, and the more people we've got, the more garbage we generate. But North Carolina hasn't approved a new landfill since 2000. The Senate's passed legislation that loosens requirements for permitting landfills, a law that was passed in 2007, which essentially shut down any new construction. Predictions are we could run out of capacity for garbage in 15 years. Becki, Senator Harry Brown from Jacksonville says the current buffer restrictions are too restrictive, adding that doing nothing is not a solution. How should our state proceed to both ensure environmental safeguards while also planning for the future?
Well, I think Senator Harry Brown's exactly right. We need to remove some of the restrictions and move forward with making long-term plans for this growth in North Carolina. It's the only responsible thing to do. And, there's been a lot of trash talk about the landfills. But, there is tremendous technology. NC State is a leader in the country. Watauga County recently got an award from the EPA for technology and new improvements in landfills. So there are a lot of safeguards that are in place to protect the environment.
A lot of the reason for this 2007 legislation, Dan, was because there was a proposed mega landfill up in the border of North Carolina, up in Camden County. And there was a lot of talk about we didn't want other states importing their garbage into North Carolina. How can we ensure this doesn't become a problem?
I don't know that they can. It's going to be difficult once you build it from accepting other people's trash for money. I mean, unfortunately, that's just the nature of commercial landfills.
So, John, is the proposed solution that the Senate has come up with, is it reasonable? I mean, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources has basically blessed it.
Well, then it must be okay. I don't know why you're asking me. That seems obvious. Look, at some point, with rural areas trying to figure out a way to create jobs, create economic activity, you have to be able to say yes to something. I would like environmentalists to say yes to something other than windmills.
Well, but you don't have to say yes to trash from states all over the region. And the question is, are we just going to build landfills that are big enough to put North Carolina's trash and have a society that we can all still live in? Or are we going to become a landfill state that attracts jobs by building giant garbage dumps? And those are two very different things. And the second point, it's got not much publicity. One thing people are going to notice right now in North Carolina, garbage trucks have to be leak-proof when they come through your neighborhood. This bill changes that to leak-resistant. And there's a lot of concern that we're actually now going to have liquids leaking from garbage trucks, and it's going to be legal. So there's a lot of
Oh,
stuff
that's
in this
all the
bill.
dogs in my neighborhood need, I can tell you that. Here's a programming note. Next week, NC Spin is one of the most enjoyable and entertaining shows we've ever presented. Our Carolina Collection series will add excerpts or air excerpts from the interview we did with former Secretary of Cultural Resources, Betty Ray McCain. I promise you're going to enjoy the stories, the memories, and the wonderful sense of humor of one of North Carolina's most outstanding citizens. Join us next week for NC Spin and Betty Ray McCain. When we come back, we're going to talk about gun control.
NC Spin will return after these messages. We all count on our community hospitals, but funding cuts are hurting hospitals' ability to care for our families. Continued government cuts may force hospitals to eliminate vital services like emergency rooms and delivering babies. Some hospitals may even be forced to close their doors. We need healthy hospitals that are financially strong. Please contact your legislator. Help protect your community's hospital and your family.
The best part about being a member of a Touchstone Energy Cooperative is that it's your Touchstone Energy Cooperative. Learn more about the power of your co-op membership at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
The Senate has passed a sweeping gun control bill that loosens the controls of buying handguns. It would repeal the requirement for a permit to buy a handgun and allow guns in bars and on school property. The North Carolina Sheriff's Association, the North Carolina Association of Police Chiefs, and the Attorney General opposed the Senate plan. The House has refused to concur with the bill, sending it to the House Rules Committee, usually a place where legislation dies. Dan, what's the reasoning behind this Senate bill, and what are the prospects it's going to be passed into law?
Well, first, I think this was one of those areas that the sponsors felt hadn't come up in recent sessions and needed a little bit more attention. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's gone to committee to die in committee.
Shouldn't it be, Becki, a pretty big concern that the sheriffs, the police chiefs, and the Attorney General all are opposed to it?
Well, I think it certainly sends a strong message, but I think what's happening here with gun control particularly is advocates of the Second Amendment have felt like over many years their gun restrictions, those Second Amendment rights, have been restricted more and more. So this is almost like the pendulum kind of swinging back in that those advocates for Second Amendment rights are trying to get some of those restrictions lifted. And so what we may see, whether it's in a study committee, whether it comes out, is sort of the pendulum swinging back perhaps a bit more, but not quite as far as restrictive as it has been.
But shouldn't we be concerned a little bit about people having guns in places where they're serving alcohol or on school property, John?
I would like to see any empirical evidence that states that allow it have any significant difference in homicides or violence or anything else. I'm not aware of any, and I think just making it policy without empirical data is a bad idea.
Well, here's some
on either side.
Here's some empirical data, and I don't think we need guns where there are alcohol, but the vast majority of Americans believe we need stricter background checks. This would actually mean less people buying handguns would have background checks. That's one of the main reasons the law enforcement community is against this. It makes no sense at a time when the mood, I think,
well,
of the
it cuts
country,
the sheriff out of the process.
Right. Well, I mean, it also means that there won't be as many background checks done of people who are buying handguns, and that's the opposite direction of, I think, the vast majority of the country thinks we need to go.
All right. North Carolina's got 153 people. This is a good segue, by the way. North Carolina has 153 people on death row sentenced to be executed, but we haven't put anybody to death since 2006 for two reasons. The first is a dispute over the supervision of those executions, with doctors who participate in executions promised sanctions. The second, however, has been the Racial Justice Act, first passed as an opportunity to review cases that might have been influenced by racial bias. Chris, the legislature passed, the governor has signed a bill repealing the Racial Justice Act, prompting a lot of people to say, to believe that executions are going to resume. But questions still persist about when or if we'll begin those executions. What's the biggest hang-up?
Well, there's a new hang-up now by repealing this law. A lot of inmates have filed claims. A lot of them were frivolous and would have been dismissed anyway, but some of them, I'm sure, have validity. And the question is, if you filed a valid claim under an existing law, what happens when that law is repealed if the claim has already been filed? And I think we're going to see a lot of disagreements. We already are among lawyers and advocates and prosecutors and DAs. So I think the courts are going to have to settle this, at least in terms of the inmates who have claims before the Racial Justice Act. And I would be remiss without saying I think this is a big mistake to repeal this law. We have evidence in Cumberland County, for example, of African Americans being excluded from a jury. We need to make sure we address that.
Dan, you're the lawyer here. What is the legal situation so far as these appeals that have been filed? Are they going to be heard in the courts, or are they going to be dismissed, or what?
Your guess is as good as mine. I think that the courts are going to have to intervene to determine whether those appeals are still going to be heard.
Becki, a lot of people are saying that because we have passed laws in North Carolina which guarantees that a person sentenced to life in prison will not be paroled, we don't need a death penalty anymore. How do you respond to that?
Well, you know, and we may not, but here's what we need to do. We need to have that debate. We need to have that honest debate instead of trying to circumvent the laws in North Carolina. The current law in North Carolina is that we do have the death penalty. And rather than trying to get around it with Racial Justice Act or other things, we need to have an honest debate about the death penalty in North Carolina.
So, John, last question. What's your prediction as to whether we will continue with executions, and if so, when?
I think executions will resume after this legal issue. I assume it will be declared moot to continue with these lawsuits, or these appeals, but we'll see.
All right, when we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about the Common Core curriculum.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
We all count on our community hospitals, but funding cuts are hurting hospitals' ability to care for our families. Continued government cuts may force hospitals to eliminate vital services like emergency rooms and delivering babies. Some hospitals may even be forced to close their doors. We need healthy hospitals that are financially strong. Please contact your legislator. Help protect your community's hospital and your family.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com. Is your business or trade organization looking for a great North Raleigh address? This beautiful, recently updated office building has 3 spacious offices perfect for law firms, accountants, agencies, and associations of any size. Our beautiful lobby boasts attractive finishes and unique Raleigh artwork. We provide ample parking and quick access to both 440 and 540 right at the corner of Falls of the Neuse and Spring Forest Road. Call us today at 919-832-1416 to schedule a tour with the owner.
We now return to NC Spin.
Concerned about disparities in curriculum and differences in measuring outcomes in public education, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers initiated the efforts that led to the development of the Common Core curriculum. North Carolina is one of many states that have adopted it and is changing to that curriculum, but recent criticisms have reopened the discussion over whether this is a good move for our state. John, 45 states have adopted the Common Core, but in recent months, several have either halted their adoption process or are threatening to withdraw from Common Core. What's causing it?
Well, there's some bad reasons people are against Common Core. There's some conspiracy theories floating around, and people are concerned about states not creating their own standards and tests. Well, I think those are bad concerns. My concern about Common Core is the expense, primarily. You know, North Carolina, like most states, got into it not knowing how much it was going to cost. The numbers look pretty questionable to me. I think we should look for alternatives.
Chris, when we got into this, we said that part of what was going to happen was that we were going to ensure uniformity in both what's being taught and what's being measured, so we could compare our state's outcomes with other states. Isn't that still a worthwhile goal?
Well, it is still a worthwhile goal, and I agree with John, in fact, that there are some problems with it, and there are conspiracy theorists on both sides that think all kind of crazy things are going to happen, including the federal government's taking over all the schools, which I heard the other day. The problem, I think, is the way the assessments are structured. I don't actually think it's going to work. I think we need to step back and figure out a different way to accomplish the same thing.
Becki, one of the things that Jim Goodnight at SAS pointed out was that North Carolina's testing shows we got 80% of the 8th graders proficient in math, whereas the NAEP test says that we've only got 36%. He says this is proof positive we need some common denominator.
That's a problem, and I think that we need to look at the testing. I'm not sure that Common Core is the best way to get us there. I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions we need to keep asking.
So what's going to happen, Dan? Are we going to implement it or not?
I think we are, but I think it's going to need some improvements as we go along.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed and be part of the conversation during the week, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or NCSpin on Facebook, and sign up for Spin Cycle, our newsletter, or get us Twitter at NCSpin Tweets. Well, we hope you'll join us next week when we're going to air our special interview with Betty Ray McCain. Until then, stay informed, have a safe 4th of July holiday, and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.